It was a cool spring morning in a quiet Oregon suburb. Families filled the local community park. Children raced around the jungle gym. Parents sipped coffee on benches, and the sun peeked shyly from behind the clouds. Among them was Rachel Miles, a 32-year-old single mother, and her 3-year-old daughter, Lily. The two were a regular sight here. Lily loved the swings more than anything, and Rachel cherished these peaceful hours before heading off to work. Rachel set her daughter down and gave her a gentle push. Lily laughed, golden curls bouncing as the swing carried her forward and back. Nearby, a police SUV had pulled up on the gravel path just beside the park's open field. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, one of them opening the back door and releasing a large German Shepherd from its kennel. The dog, lean and muscular, trotted out proudly, wearing a badge emblazoned harness. It was a K-9 unit from the local precinct. Most park-goers barely noticed the officers appeared to be conducting a light training drill, something they'd done before without incident. But this time, something felt different. Rachel's attention drifted as she watched the officers start what looked like a scent trail exercise with the dog. It wasn't until the shepherd suddenly jerked toward the playground area that Rachel's body stiffened. The handler struggled to pull the leash back as the dog barked loudly, aggressively, and strained against the hold. The barking startled several children, including Lily, who immediately stopped swinging. Her eyes widened. The dog wasn't just barking. It had locked its eyes directly on her. Rachel stood up fast. "Hey," she called, trying to shield Lily with her arms. "Can you control that thing?" One of the officers chuckled. "He's just doing his job, ma'am. He's got a good nose." But the dog wasn't sniffing the ground or chasing a dummy. It was locked in a stare down with a toddler, growling low. Lily began to cry. Rachel scooped her up and walked away quickly, heart pounding. She didn't feel safe. "That wasn't okay," she muttered under her breath, hugging Lily tightly. The moment seemed to pass as the officers pulled the dog back and resumed their drill farther off. But the damage had already been done out. It was only when they got home that the real shock began. Later that afternoon, while Rachel made lunch, Lily sat quietly at the kitchen table, coloring. Suddenly, she looked up and said, "The dog bit me." On the air, Rachel blinked. "What?" "The mean dog. He bit me here." Lily motioned to her cheek and made a barking sound. "He was shouting." Rachel knelt beside her. "Did he bite you, sweetheart?" "Are you hurt?" "No, but he barked like he wanted to eat me. He was mad." "Like the man." Rachel paused. "What man?" "The man with the leash. He told the dog I was bad." Rachel felt the hairs on her neck rise. Lily's words weren't making perfect sense, but they weren't random either. The girl's voice was quiet, shaken. Her eyes, usually bright and full of mischief, were heavy with something much older than her age. "And then I was in the room," Lily added suddenly. "What room?" "The white room," the man said, quiet, "and the dog was yelling. Then it was loud." Rachel's blood ran cold. There was no white room at the park. There was no yelling, at least none that she had heard. Was this her daughter's imagination running wild? A reaction to fear? Or was Lily remembering something else? Rachel gently sat down next to her and started writing down what Lily said. Every word. Over the next hour, Lily kept drawing. Strange pictures. One with a dog growling next to a tall figure in blue. Another showing what looked like a room with a light above and big eyes watching her. It was eerie. Rachel knew how children process fear. It often comes out in messy, mixed-up ways. But she also knew children don't invent trauma. They experience it. That night, Rachel tucked Lily into bed and stayed beside her until she fell asleep. Then she went into the living room and replayed the events in her mind. The officer's smirk, The dog's stare, the aggressive barking, her daughter's fear. Something wasn't right. She opened her laptop and began searching local ordinances on canine training in public parks. Then she started a public records request for any available body cam footage from the 2 officers at the park that day. Just as she hit submit, a quiet voice behind her said, "Mommy?" Rachel turned to see Lily standing there, holding her favorite stuffed bunny. "Can the dog hear me in my dreams?" Rachel's heart clenched. "No, baby," she whispered, scooping her daughter up. "Not anymore." She held her daughter tighter than ever before. Whatever had happened at the park that morning wasn't over. Not even close. The following morning, Rachel sat at the breakfast table, watching Lily as she stirred her cereal absent-mindedly. The usual cheerful humming or storytelling was missing. The little girl looked lost in thought, eyes wide and distant. Rachel placed a comforting hand on her daughter's back. "Did you have any dreams last night, honey?" Lily slowly nodded. The dog was in the room again. He was mad. Rachel bit her lip. "What kind of room?" "The white room, with the loud light. He told me to hush again." "He said he didn't." Like my voice, Rachel felt a chill climb her spine. This wasn't a dream. Lily was describing it like a memory, and the details weren't ones a 3-year-old would just make up. White rooms, loud lights, commands, even the concept of someone not liking her voice. That was deeply specific and unusual. "What do you mean by the dog talked?" Rachel asked carefully. Lily didn't hesitate. "He didn't use words like us. But he looked at me and made me feel quiet inside, like I wasn't allowed to say anything." That stopped Rachel in her tracks. She spent the day keeping Lily close, noting everything she said. Again, Lily mentioned the man with the leash, saying he was angry because she wouldn't sit down. But Lily had never sat down near the dog. She hadn't even been within 10 feet. Rachel began to wonder, was it possible her daughter had encountered this dog and officer before? Was something triggering a buried memory? She dug through her photo library and found dozens of pictures from the park over the last few months. And there, hidden in the background of one photo, was the same officer and the same dog walking by in the distance. It had been from weeks ago. How many times had this K9 unit been in the area? Rachel's anxiety grew. That evening, she spoke to Lily while she colored on the carpet. "Lily, do you remember seeing that dog before yesterday?" "Yes," Lily said casually. "He was in the white room too. He said if I cried, he'd bark." Rachel's stomach twisted. "How many times have you seen that dog?" "3 times, Lily said, holding up her fingers. "Once at the room, and by the swings. Then when he almost bit me." Rachel stared at her, stunned. "Honey, do you remember where the white room was?" "It had the picture with the flag," Lily said. Rachel's heart stopped. The American flag. Every courtroom, every police interview room, every government office. That narrowed nothing down, but it confirmed one thing. Her daughter remembered being somewhere official, somewhere intimidating. Rachel called a friend who worked as a child trauma specialist and asked if she could observe Lily. The friend agreed to visit the next morning. That night, Rachel barely slept. She watched over Lily like a hawk, trying to make sense of the puzzle. How could a 3-year-old fabricate such emotionally vivid memories? Why was she associating a specific dog and handler with fear, silence, and control? And why did she say, "bit me on the air"? That phrase echoed in Rachel's mind. The next morning, the child therapist sat with Lily on the floor. She used toys to reenact a few scenarios, allowing Lily to express herself through storytelling. Lily took a toy dog and made it bark in a doll's face. He told her to be quiet. She said softly. A therapist gently asked, "Who told her?" "The man. He made the dog do it. What happened next? The room got loud. Rachel watched from the side, holding back tears. The therapist gave her a subtle nod. Later, the therapist confirmed Rachel's fears. Lily was displaying signs of trauma-based memory recall. She wasn't inventing these events. She had experienced something emotionally overwhelming. Then came a twist. The therapist mentioned that some K9 units have been used to intimidate or pressure individuals, especially in high-stress environments. Children who witness aggressive dog behavior, especially near officers shouting, can store those events in fragmented memory. Rachel's thoughts spun. Was Lily accidentally present during a situation she was never supposed to see? Could a police officer have allowed a child near an aggressive dog, maybe even during an off-the-books interrogation or mistake? Rachel's laptop pinged an email from the city. Clerk confirmed that her public records request had been partially approved. The body cam footage from the park had been uploaded to a secure drive. With shaking hands, she logged in and pressed play. Video showed the officer smiling as he walked toward the play area with the dog. The other officer was off to the side. Then, clearly audible, came the line, "Watch this. He's got a nose for brats." The dog barked, ears perked, and lunged toward the swing set toward Lily. Laughter. Then, let's see if she flinches. Rachel paused the video and stared at the screen, horrified. This wasn't harmless. It wasn't a joke. It was a deliberate act. They targeted her daughter for amusement. And that explained Lily's trauma. Her small child wasn't imagining the threat. She had experienced it at the hands of people entrusted to protect. Rachel closed her laptop, hands trembling. This wasn't just a mother's worry anymore. This was a case of misconduct, and she was ready to take it to court. The next morning, Rachel barely touched her coffee. Her hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the body cam footage again, pausing every few seconds to examine facial expressions, words, and the dog's behavior. She watched the same 30-second sequence over and over. It made her stomach churn each time. The officer had clearly used the dog inappropriately. What kind of professional jokes about a child flinching? The language was subtle, yes, but laced with mockery and intent. He's got a nose for brats. Let's see if she flinches. The laughter. It was there. Cold, casual, dangerous. Rachel took a breath and saved the clip to a flash drive. She made 3 backups. She wasn't taking any chances. The next step was obvious. She needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who could understand both child trauma and police overreach. Her first call was to a civil rights attorney in Portland named Grace Alston, a woman known for her tenacity in cases involving institutional negligence. Grace met Rachel 2 days later in a small coffee shop. After listening to the full story and reviewing the footage, she leaned back slowly, eyes sharp. This is not just intimidation. It's targeted psychological manipulation of a child, she said firmly. And whether they intended it or not, they crossed a major line. Rachel's voice shook. Can we really do something about this? Grace nodded. We're not accusing the dog. We're accusing the man who used the dog like a weapon of fear. And now that we have footage, they can't hide. By the end of the week, the case was filed. Rachel kept Lily away from the media as reporters began sniffing around. The story broke online first. Mom claims police canine emotionally traumatized. Daughter. Comment sections exploded. Some people mocked the idea, calling Rachel overprotective. Others demanded the officer be fired immediately. Rachel ignored the noise. She had one goal: make them answer for what they did. Soon after the court accepted the case, the department responded with a bland public statement. The incident is under internal review. The K9 unit has been temporarily reassigned pending results. No apology, no admission. Just bureaucracy. Then came discovery. Grace demanded full access to the entire body cam footage, not just the 30 seconds Rachel had received. After a week of stonewalling, they were given the uncut tape, nearly 20 minutes long. What they found in those minutes was even worse. The footage revealed that the officers had been using the dog inappropriately the entire time. At one point, a handler encouraged the dog to bark at a group of teenagers near the skate park, smirking and saying, "Let him remind them who's in charge." Later, he joked about how even kids get the message when Rex stares them down. Grace's voice was tight with fury as she watched. This man treats his K9 like a weapon of fear, not justice. What struck Rachel the hardest was how many people had likely experienced this intimidation without ever saying anything. If Lily hadn't been so young, so visibly afraid, and so honest, none of this would have come to light. The first court hearing arrived fast. Rachel sat beside Grace, clutching Lily's tiny hand, while the officer Sergeant Mike Rhodes sat confidently with his department-appointed lawyer. He wore his uniform proudly, as if to shield himself behind the badge. Judge reviewed the footage and allowed it to be presented during trial. But what drew gasps in the courtroom wasn't the clip of the barking dog. It was the stillness that followed when Lily, sitting with a child advocate, watched the video and began crying quietly. She whispered, "He's doing it again," and covered her ears. Everyone in the room heard it. The judge paused and looked directly at the defense. "You say this was harmless play, but that child's reaction says otherwise." Sergeant Rhodes remained silent. Rachel didn't cry in court. She sat still, composed, but her rage burned inside her. After the hearing, Grace spoke to reporters. "This is not about attacking police. It's about holding individuals accountable who misuse their authority and their animals to intimidate civilians, including children. Our client's daughter was emotionally harmed, and the footage proves it." Public opinion began shifting. The more people saw of the footage, the more they realized how wrong the behavior was. Editorials were written. Activists joined the conversation. Questions were raised. How many other kids had been frightened into silence by dogs used this way? How many parents were told to just brush it off? Even Lily's phrase, "bit me on the air," was being examined by psychologists and trauma specialists. One expert went on a local news segment and said, "Children describe emotional harm differently." To Lily, the aggressive barking inches from her face felt like a bite. Her body froze. Her voice was stolen. That is trauma, and that matters. Back at home, Rachel continued to document Lily's drawings and stories. Her daughter was slowly improving, but the fear hadn't fully left. Every time she saw a police car, Lily tensed. Once, she asked, "Is the dog still mad at me?" Rachel hugged her close and whispered, "No, baby. He's not allowed to be near you ever again." In that moment, Rachel knew the fight wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about ensuring no child ever had to ask that question again. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension as the second hearing began. This time, more people filled the wooden benches, journalists with notepads, community members who had seen the news, and a few off-duty officers observing from the back. The air felt heavy. Everyone knew this wasn't just a civil case anymore. It had become a referendum on power, accountability, and the unheard voices of children. Rachel sat on the left side of the courtroom beside her attorney, Grace Alston, her shoulders square and expression unreadable. She had spent days preparing for this moment, rehearsing with Grace, reading documents, organizing Lily's testimony through a licensed child advocate. But no amount of preparation could quiet the nerves in her chest as she looked across the aisle. Sergeant Mike Rhodes, the K9 handler at the center of the controversy, sat with a neutral expression. He wore a pressed uniform and looked entirely composed. Too composed. His defense team had shifted strategy. They now argued that what occurred in the park wasn't only non-malicious, but also exaggerated, that Rachel was projecting her own trauma onto her child, and that Lily's statements were, at best, the product of fear and imagination. Grace countered swiftly. "We're not trying to prove physical harm," she told the court. "We are proving emotional damage caused by targeted aggression from an officer misusing his authority and his animal partner." The judge, a seasoned woman named Madeline Kerrigan, nodded calmly. "This court is not unfamiliar with cases involving trauma, and I will weigh the evidence accordingly," she said. Then, the body cam footage was played again, this time for the full court. The room watched as the officer approached the playground with a German Shepherd. His voice, clear and mocking, said, "Let's see if she flinches." The dog lunged and barked as Lily appeared on screen, sitting on a swing, unaware of the coming aggression. The officer tugged the leash back with one hand, still laughing. There was no physical contact, but the emotional impact was palpable. In the courtroom, Lily sat silently beside a trained child advocate, holding a stuffed bunny in her lap. As the footage played, her tiny hands gripped the toy tighter. Her face crumpled slightly. She turned her face away and whispered to the advocate, "Please tell him to stop." Everyone heard it. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. It was a moment no one could deny, not even Rhodes' defense team. The psychological damage was real. It was visible, raw, and immediate. When the footage ended, Grace stood up. What we just witnessed was not discipline. It was not a demonstration. It was deliberate emotional coercion aimed at a child for amusement, and it left her scarred. The defense attorney stood slowly. "Your Honor, with respect, the footage shows a controlled, professional officer performing a routine exercise. Children react to police dogs in many ways. Our client cannot be held responsible for every emotional response a bystander has to his dog." Judge Kerrigan raised an eyebrow. "Except this wasn't just a reaction. This was a child singled out. And we all heard what your client said on tape." The turning point came when the court admitted into evidence a psychologist's testimony. The expert, who had spent time with Lily, explained that her memories were consistent, emotionally resonant, and not fabricated. She explained that young children don't invent trauma, they absorb and express it differently, through fragmented phrases and feelings. She consistently refers to the same white room, the same anger from the officer, and the same sensation of being silenced, the psychologist said. Her phrase, "bit me on the air," is a powerful metaphor. She wasn't bitten, but she was emotionally attacked. And at her developmental stage, those experiences embed deeply into identity and fear. Outside the courtroom, the story continued to spiral. Local media was already broadcasting the footage. It spread on social media with captions like, "Cop uses dog to intimidate toddler," and 3-year-old testimony breaks courtroom silence. Public opinion became deeply divided. Some still believed it was all a reach, just a child scared by a bark, but many more now saw something deeper. They saw a little girl's fear treated as a joke, and a mother's voice dismissed until video forced the truth out. Meanwhile, inside the department, cracks began to show. An anonymous source leaked internal reports showing that Sergeant Rhodes had received previous informal warnings for unnecessary canine proximity during civilian interactions. One involved a teenager who was barked at until he cried. Another involved a protester who filed a complaint dismissed for lack of footage. These patterns, once buried, were now in open view. When Grace presented these records in court, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "This isn't one isolated mistake," she said. "It's a pattern, one that could have been stopped if anyone had listened." But it took a 3-year-old child to bring it all to light. The judge adjourned the session to deliberate on whether the case would proceed to a full civil trial and potentially criminal charges. But even before the decision, something had already shifted. Rachel walked out of court that day, holding Lily's hand. People no longer whispered behind her back. Now, they nodded as she passed, because a little girl's voice had shattered the silence and forced an entire courtroom to listen. The courtroom revelations had shifted everything. With the judge ruling that the case would proceed to a full civil trial, the story grew bigger, reaching national headlines. Talk shows debated it. Civil rights groups picked it up. But behind the media noise, Grace Alston, Rachel's attorney, was digging deeper, and what she uncovered was more disturbing than anyone expected. Late one evening, Grace sat in her downtown office surrounded by printed documents and open tabs on her laptop. She had requested internal affairs reports on Sergeant Mike Rhodes under the Freedom of Information Act. Several came redacted, but others buried deep in older databases were revealing. One case from 2 years ago detailed a complaint filed by a mother whose 14-year-old son was pinned to a wall by Rhodes' canine during a routine stop-and-question encounter. The dog hadn't bitten, but the boy was terrified and developed a speech stutter afterward. The case was closed as unsubstantiated due to lack of physical evidence. Another record mentioned a protest in front of City Hall where Rhodes allegedly allowed his dog to lunge at a college student who was holding a sign. Again dismissed, but most chilling was a handwritten note in one archived complaint. This officer uses his canine as a scare tactic. Not safe around youth. Grace leaned back in her chair, exhaling sharply. He's been doing this for years, she muttered. The next morning, she brought the findings to Rachel. They sat across from each other in Grace's office. The weight of truth thick in the air. Rachel read each file slowly, hands shaking as she turned the pages. Why didn't anyone stop him? She asked. Because no one pushed hard enough, Grace replied. Until now. They immediately filed a motion to admit these prior incidents into court as a pattern of behavior, not isolated events. The defense fought back, calling the reports irrelevant and inadmissible without direct correlation. But Judge Kerrigan disagreed. This court must consider the defendant's history if it reveals consistent misconduct, particularly involving children, she ruled. When court resumed, Grace called a surprise witness, one of the original complainants, now 17 years old. He stepped into the courtroom nervously, holding a worn notebook. I was walking home from football practice, he testified. The officer stopped me for curfew. His dog growled the entire time. Then he let him bark in my face until I backed into a fence. I didn't sleep right for months. The courtroom went still. The boy's voice cracked, but remained steady. I told someone back then. They said it was normal. The jury listened intently. The picture of Sergeant Rhodes as a harmless professional had shattered. The defense tried redirecting, pointing out that none of the prior incidents involved physical harm, and no charges were ever filed. But their arguments felt hollow now. The emotional harm, the intimidation, was undeniable. Outside the courtroom, Rachel held a press conference. Dozens of microphones pointed toward her as reporters shouted questions. She waited for silence, then spoke clearly. My daughter isn't the first person to be scared into silence. She's just the first who spoke and was heard. We're not here to ruin reputations. We're here to make sure officers who abuse power don't get to hide behind uniforms anymore. Public sentiment turned. Petitions started circulating to review K-9 protocols statewide. Advocacy groups requested audits of K-9 units and handler conduct. Suddenly, people were asking how often police dogs were used to control, not protect. Meanwhile, Sergeant Rhodes remained publicly quiet, but privately. Insiders said he was feeling the heat. His badge, once untouchable, now felt heavy. and the department was quietly conducting an internal disciplinary hearing, one that could strip him of canine privileges. The most powerful moment came days later when Rachel and Lily attended a community forum on police accountability. It wasn't official. No judges, no cameras, just local families, teachers, and officers gathered in a town hall. Rachel didn't plan to speak, but when the microphone was offered, she stood. She didn't read from notes. She didn't rant. "I'm not angry at all officers," she said. "I'm angry at silence. I'm angry that my daughter had to feel small in front of someone paid to protect her. And I'm heartbroken that others were made to feel the same way and never believed." Lily still asks if the dog is mad at her. "That's what we're fighting, fear that follows you home." Someone in the crowd clapped. Then another. Within seconds, the room filled with applause. Rachel looked down at Lily, who sat drawing quietly beside her, unaware of how her truth had stirred a city. The trial was far from over. But now, they weren't standing alone. Rhodes' past had finally been dragged into the light. Every page, every ignored complaint, every voice that had once been dismissed was now part of a bigger reckoning. And Lily's small voice had become the loudest of them all. The courtroom grew quieter with each passing day. The shock of the early revelations had settled into something heavier, an awareness that this wasn't just about one child or one officer. It was about a pattern, a culture, and perhaps something systemic that had gone unchecked for far too long. Grace Alston knew it was time to strike at the heart of the matter. The defense was still clinging to the idea that Sergeant Rhodes and his dog, Rex, were operating within standard training protocols. But Grace had lined up a witness who would unravel that narrative completely. On the fourth day of testimony, Dr. Ian Kessler took the stand. He was a nationally respected canine behavioral expert with 27 years of experience and had testified in over a dozen state and federal cases involving police dogs. His presence brought a new kind of authority to the courtroom. Grace stood before him. "Dr. Kessler, in your professional opinion, based on the footage and reports you've reviewed, was the officer's behavior appropriate?" "Not even close," he replied without hesitation. This was a misuse of the dog's training, bordering on psychological abuse. Police dogs are not toys. They're trained tools of law enforcement, and they must be handled with precision, control, and care. He explained how Police K-9 South are trained to detect scent, track suspects, and detain aggressors, but never to bark at civilians for intimidation. Allowing a canine to bark mere feet from a non-threatening toddler without any lawful reason is reckless. The officer escalated a non-situation for personal amusement. That violates ethical and departmental guidelines. Then he dropped the line. That made several jurors shift in their seats. In that moment, the dog wasn't used as a partner. He was used as a weapon. Rachel stared at the floor, jaw clenched. That one sentence echoed in her mind. It was exactly what she had felt that day in the park. The coldness, the disregard, the smile on the officer's face. Rex hadn't been protecting anyone. He had been performing cruelty on command. The defense tried to discredit Dr. Kessler, citing that the dog hadn't made physical contact, that barking itself wasn't illegal. But Dr. Kessler stood firm. The law also recognizes emotional injury. If you pointed a loaded weapon at a child as a joke, would you call that harmless? No, this is no different. The jury looked shaken. And then came the expert's evaluation of Lily's now famous phrase, "Bit me on the air." "I've reviewed cases involving young trauma victims," Dr. Kessler said. That expression is profoundly revealing. It tells us she felt invaded, attacked without touch. That's the power of fear-based trauma. It doesn't always leave bruises, but it leaves scars. Court adjourned early that day. Rachel sat on a bench outside, Watching Lily chase Bubbles in the courtyard, she noticed something. Lily laughed. More easily now. Her shoulders were lighter. She still clung to her bunny, but she was healing. Slowly, but visibly. That night, Rachel received a call from a police officer who had served with Rhodes in the past. He didn't want to testify publicly, but his message was clear. "You're doing the right thing," he said. We all knew Mike pushed boundaries, but nobody ever pressed charges, so he just kept doing it. "I'm sorry your daughter had to go through it, but thank you for not backing down." The call left Rachel emotional. For so long, she had felt like she was pushing against a wall too heavy to move. But now, the cracks were showing. The next morning in court, the department's own internal investigation was admitted into the record. It confirmed that Rhodes had failed to follow multiple K9 handling protocols, including failure to maintain a safe distance from non-target civilians, especially children, and using his dog in a manner inconsistent with training objectives. His superiors had warned him once. After that, they had turned a blind eye. Now, they couldn't. The department announced that Rhodes would be placed on administrative leave pending the trial's outcome. Rex, the dog, had already been removed from service and placed in behavioral rehabilitation. There was discussion of retiring him permanently, not because he was dangerous, but because his training had been corrupted. Rachel thought of that every time Lily asked, "Where's the barking dog now?" She would always answer, "Far away," and not allowed to scare anyone anymore. The next day in court, Grace delivered a subtle, powerful blow during closing arguments. This isn't about barking. It's about trust. It's about whether officers entrusted with both weapons and animals should be allowed to use either for humiliation, fear, or fun. Lily was 3 years old. She posed no threat, but her silence was taken as consent, until she found the courage to speak. She paused, turning to the jury. "Don't let her be punished for that courage." The jury nodded quietly. The weight of every child who had ever been dismissed seemed to rest on their shoulders. And Rachel? She sat still, holding Lily's hand. No matter the verdict, she knew one thing now. This fight was never just hers. It was every parent's, every child's, and every dog trained to serve, not scare. The courtroom was packed on the final day of the trial. Reporters from every major network had arrived, their cameras angled toward the jury box and the families in the front row. Outside, a crowd gathered, waiting anxiously for news. This wasn't just a local case anymore. It had become a symbol of accountability, of the power of a child's voice, and of the fragile trust between citizens and law enforcement. Rachel sat beside Lily, now 8 months older and noticeably more confident. Lily's curls framed her face, but the shyness was still there, a reminder of the trauma she had endured. Yet today, she sat upright, clutching her mother's hand with quiet strength. The judge read the jury's decision aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Sergeant Mike Rhodes, liable for negligence and emotional distress caused to the plaintiff, Lily Miles." A ripple ran through the courtroom. Rachel exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. For years, she had fought to be heard. Now, her daughter's pain had been validated in the highest court. The ruling ordered that Rhodes be suspended indefinitely from the police force, stripped of his canine handler privileges, and mandated to undergo psychological evaluation and retraining. Additionally, the police department was required to conduct a full review of all K9 units, with new regulations to protect civilians, especially children. But more than the legal victory, the decision sparked something greater. News anchors praised the ruling as a landmark moment for child advocacy and police reform. Social media was flooded with messages of support for Lily, calling her a tiny hero and a voice for the voiceless. Petitions demanding stricter canine handling standards went viral, and legislators announced plans to propose new bills regulating police dog training and use in public spaces. Rachel stood before reporters shortly after the verdict, holding Lily close. Her voice was steady but emotional. "This case was never just about punishment," she said. "It was about protecting children like Lily and families who deserve safety and respect. My daughter's courage gave her a voice when so many are silent. We hope this sends a message. Abuse of power, no matter how small or large, will be challenged." The story didn't end in the courtroom. Police departments across the country began reviewing their own protocols, prompted by public pressure. Training programs were overhauled. Officers were educated on the psychological effects of using K-9 units improperly. Some cities even introduced community advisory panels to oversee K-9 deployments. Back home, Lily began attending therapy regularly. The sessions helped her process her fear and rebuild trust in the world around her. Though scars remained, her laughter returned more often, filling Rachel's heart with hope. One day, Lily pointed at a picture book of animals. "Mommy, can we get a puppy?" she asked. Rachel smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "Maybe. Someday, baby. But only a very gentle one." Lily grinned, eyes shining with possibility. The little girl who once trembled in fear had become a beacon of change, proof that even the smallest voices can echo loudly enough to shake the system. Months passed since the verdict, but the ripple effects of Lily's brave stand continued to spread far beyond the courtroom walls. The story of the 3-year-old's shocking accusation against a police dog had transformed into a movement, one demanding accountability, compassion, and change. Rachel watched Lily grow with cautious optimism. The trauma was still there, a shadow that sometimes darkened quiet moments, but therapy was helping. Lily's therapist called her progress remarkable, praising her resilience and the support system Rachel had built around her. One afternoon, while sitting in the park that once held the scene of trauma, Rachel noticed Lily playing near the swings, laughter spilling freely this time. The same swings where fear had taken root now held joy. It was a small victory, but one Rachel treasured fiercely. That day, a local news crew approached Rachel with an invitation. They wanted to feature Lily's story in a documentary about children and trauma, how the youngest witnesses can sometimes become the loudest voices for justice. Rachel hesitated, but agreed, knowing that sharing their journey could inspire others. The documentary aired nationwide and was met with overwhelming support. Viewers were touched by Lily's innocence and courage, and by Rachel's unwavering fight for her daughter's dignity. Messages poured in from parents, advocates, and even some law enforcement officers who wanted to help reform the system. At a community event organized to promote police reform, Rachel was invited to speak. Standing on a modest stage, she looked out at the crowd, families, officers, activists, and children who had once been afraid, but were now hopeful. "I never imagined my daughter's fear would turn into something bigger than us," Rachel said, softly, voice steady but full of emotion. "But it did. And it showed us all how important it is to listen, not just to the loud voices, but to the quiet ones too. Children see more than we realize. Their fears and feelings matter. They deserve to be heard and protected." Lily sat in the front row, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny. She smiled shyly, her presence a testament to healing and hope. Rachel's fight also inspired legislative change. A bill known as Lily's Law was introduced in the state legislature, aiming to establish clear standards for canine training, mandatory psychological screenings for handlers, and strict consequences for misuse of police dogs. Lawmakers praised the bill's focus on transparency and child safety, and it passed with overwhelming support. Yet Rachel knew the journey wasn't over. Trust between communities and law enforcement is delicate and must be nurtured carefully. She remained active in advocacy groups, pushing for continued reforms and awareness. Meanwhile, Sergeant Mike Rhodes faced disciplinary hearings and retraining programs. Though he remained in law enforcement, his role changed drastically. He no longer worked with K-9 units, and his reputation bore the scars of the case. For Rachel, the victory was bittersweet. She had fought not only for justice, but for the healing of her daughter and others like her. The system had flaws, but their story had forced it to confront uncomfortable truths. On a quiet evening, Rachel tucked Lily into bed. The little girl's eyes sparkled with curiosity and peace far from the fear that had once haunted her. "Mommy," Lily whispered, "do you think the dog is happy now?" Rachel smiled, brushing a curl from Lily's forehead. "I think he's learning to be better, and so are we." Lily yawned, snuggling beneath her blanket. "I'm glad you helped me." Rachel kissed her forehead gently. "I'm glad you found your voice." Outside, the city settled into night, unaware of the profound change sparked by one small, brave child's truth. The road ahead would be long. But for Rachel and Lily, it was a road paved with hope, healing, and the promise that no voice, no matter how small, would ever be ignored again.